Today our message is the Beatitudes. If we want to know the basic philosophy of a scientist or a scholar or a politician, it is quite logical to study his speeches. So to know what Jesus really taught, we need to consider seriously his one recorded talk, the Sermon on the Mount. We'll be dealing with the Sermon on the Mount in the days to come as this portion of our study of my book, Discover the Power Within You. The sermon is introduced by an 8-verse prose poem that has been called the Beatitudes. The Beatitudes is a general summation of the religion of Jesus. And he doesn't commence by saying you must do this or that. This was the way of the old law and the prophets, and it prevailed in much religion today. The old law outlined a conformity to external practices, such as keeping the Sabbath, observing the Passover, and all sorts of observances, hundreds of them. But Jesus speaks not of conforming, but of transforming. The old order taught men what to do. Jesus showed them what to be, how to think. So these ideals are actually beatitudes, attitudes of being. And it begins, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." We've been a long time outgrowing the stigma of the old tradition that it is a virtue to be poor. The root word translated spirit is more accurately translated pride, poor in pride, in other words. Theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Heaven is not a place in the sky where you get your eternal reward. Jesus said the kingdom of heaven is within. It's an unfolding possibility of the releasement of the imprisoned splendor. So Jesus is saying, empty yourself of desire to exercise personal self-will in the search for self-realization, in the search for God. It means to be teachable, to have an open mind to truth, to renounce preconceived opinions in a childlike, wholehearted eagerness to know the truth. It's not an easy attitude. Why is it so difficult to know truth? Why did the rich young man turn sorrowfully away? Because he had great possessions. So there's a need, you see, to let go of our mental baggage, to let go of the self-image of the miserable sinner, and to get a new feeling of wonderful child of God. You must be willing to let go of old beliefs and be willing to say, I don't know the answer, but I'm willing to learn. And secondly, blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. Now, the word comfort popularly means to help or strengthen or cheer. To Jesus, it seems to mean to experience the presence of God. This blessing is promised to those that mourn. Now, this is not saying that mourning or the crisis that produced it is good. It is not necessary for a person to sorrow or mourn, for there can be no sorrow for one who is living at one with God. But sorrow and trouble brought about by wrong thinking can be useful. Some persons refuse to open their minds to truth until they're compelled by sorrow and pain. So for them, the sorrow may be good, for a blessing may come from it. So the first two Beatitudes indicate two ways of coming into the knowledge of truth. The first, to become poor in spirit, to become open-minded and teachable. And the second, to resist truth in mind until one's life is devastated by the fruits of wrong thinking, such as sickness and sorrow and failure. These may break down one's self-will and force him back upon the pure truth of being as a last result. So the one who sorrows is blessed, because in a sense it is God's opportunity in man's extremity. Then we go on, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. From a human point of view, this really doesn't make sense, because it appears certainly the aggressive and not the meek who inherit and possess the earth. Some have thought Jesus was talking about some future millennium when these things would come to pass, but remember he said the kingdom of heaven is within. There's an Oriental adage, meekness compels God himself. So Jesus is talking about meekness not toward people, but toward God. The Greek origin of meek is praeis, P-R-A-E-I-S, which means tamed. Consider the raw power of Niagara Falls, but with the great turbines generating electricity, the falls have been tamed. It could be said that the meekness of the falls has inherited the earth. This beatitude refers to an attitude of respect for divine law and the willingness to work with law. One who fights for his rights is working in the wrong way. In other words, we shouldn't say the world owes me a living, but the universe owes me a living, and will freely give it if we plug in, if we become attuned to it. The great artist, the great composer, the great scientist all demonstrate an attitude of meekness toward law, toward the inner flow of ideas. The meek or receptive mind invites God ideas. So we go on, blessed are they which do hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled. Jesus, you see, deals ever with states of mind. So the word righteousness here means right thinking. It is the right attitude that makes the successful person. Right attitudes make for health. Right attitudes enable one to overcome. But Jesus is saying you must be hungry. instead of an athlete who is not giving his best. He isn't hungry enough. One may want to be cured of alcoholism, but he may not really want to give up drinking. If a person is in the gutter, to be helped, he must think out of the gutter thoughts. He must look up and reach for something higher. It may well be that the sick person doesn't really want to be well. His sickness may be an escape, which brings him attention and sympathy. So when you're sick of being sick, you'll get well. When you're really hungry, when you hunger and thirst for righteousness, you're going to experience growth. And then, blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. This is the law of consciousness. If you want to be loved, you must love. If you want friends, be friendly. If you want just treatment, be just. We may be prone to judge, to condemn. As we say so often, let there be peace on earth and let it begin with me. We need to build a consciousness of love and joy and justice. So we don't look for approval from others. We should keep our minds stayed on God. The key, project love. He who walks in love and peace walks in the charmed circle of protection, tends to draw the best from every person. And then, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. On the lowest level, our contact with the world about us is through the senses, mainly sight. On this level, we see good and evil, and life is a very precarious experience. Jesus is saying true sight is insight. What the eyes report is determined by what the mind believes. The Hebrew word for eye is ayin, which means fountain. In other words, it's a projection. When you have purity of insight, you project that consciousness everywhere. You see God, which means you see from God consciousness, and you project that seeingness into all things, and it becomes a stream of blessing. Righteous judgment is seeing from God consciousness. If you want to change the world, you must change the way you see the world. Look out another window, in other words. You're not in the world to set it right, but to see it rightly. And right seeing is the passport from illusion to the heaven of accomplishment. And then, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called children of God. This is a tremendous key to the potential of God power within. You are a son of God, but you only become this in expression when you're attuned to God and express His love and peace. As Paul says, as many as are led by the Spirit of God, these are the sons of God. The great potential that is yours as a child of God only becomes yours to experience when you act the part. As we tell our children in Sunday school to say, I'm a child of God and I act like one. You are the heir to all the infinite potential that inheres in all God's creation, and you can have all that you can use. A musician knows there's music in the air, but he can harness it or release it only by becoming a skilled musician. He must practice, not to enable him to make music, but to free him from clumsiness so he can let music flow. Peace comes not by treaties or wars, but when people become peace-minded, get into the spirit and let it flow. We need to practice for peace by becoming truly peaceful. And peacemakers are not just called children of God. That's the after result. The real key is they must call themselves children of God to be true peacemakers. Let it begin with me. And finally, blessed are they which are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are ye when men shall revile you and persecute you and say all manner of evil against you falsely for my sake. Rejoice and be exceeding glad, for great is your reward in heaven, for so persecuted they the prophets which were before you. Now this is a startling statement, and the literal acceptance of it has led to martyrdom with stoic passivity. Certainly there are challenges to living in a right or righteous way, such as the person who may be required to engage in illegal practices by an unscrupulous employer and may be dismissed because he refuses. But there's a more personal application of this beatitude, and the key is in thinking. Whenever you set a course of right thinking, of disciplined action, you run right into the cross-currents of your own warring thoughts. And this is inward persecution. I call it the inertial force. Remember, Paul says, that which I would I do not, and that which I would not, that I do. Jesus knew this inner persecution. Remember his temptation in the wilderness? When this inner spirit, this tempting force was saying, don't be foolish, you can use your power for great gain. But he said, get thee behind me. In other words, Jesus is saying in this beatitude, to be inwardly tempted is good, because it is a sign of growth, an indication that you're at least trying to pick yourself up out of human consciousness. If there's no attempt to grow, then there's no temptation. So he's saying, don't be discouraged. Don't say, why should I be so persecuted? Know that it is a step in growth, and rejoice and be glad. Sing a song of joy, for joy releases strength and courage and increased determination. Press on past your humanity to your divinity. As he says, the kingdom of heaven is within. So when human consciousness tempts you, don't be discouraged. Give thanks that he that is within you is greater than he that is in the world of consciousness. Keep on. And remember, the negative person isn't tempted. So there's something good about the fact that you're being tempted. So if you feel the inward war, it's a good sign. All who have ever accomplished anything in life have had to pass that stage in growth. So give thanks that you've gotten there, and be of good cheer, for I have overcome the world. That in you which is only begotten, begotten only of God, is all ready to come over or overcome the world. You've put your hand to the plow. Don't look back. You're on the way. You're growing. You're unfolding. You're expressing your inner greatness.